Listen to this. The former drummer of the Beatles, Ringo Starr, is coming to the Old Pueblo.
In a dramatic turn that shocked the music industry, Ringo Starr, the heartbeat of the most famous music band to have ever existed, the Beatles, finally broke his silence on how the presence of Yoko No drove the Beatles to its breaking point. Yoko Ono's avant-garde ideas clashed with the Beatles, who were more traditional. Was it these clashes that led to the end of the legendary band? Will the music world ever see a band like this again? Join us as we explore how, at 84, Ringo Starr finally confesses Yoko Ono destroyed the Beatles. Tensions within the Beatles. During their final years, he describes a band that was once united by their love for music, now fragmented by personal conflicts and external influences. The presence of Ono in the studio was a constant source of friction. He recounts instances where suggestions and ideas by Ono disrupted the band's creative process, leading to heated arguments and growing resentment. Yoko Ono had become a constant in the life of John Lennon and was inseparable from him. She was always present in the studio with him. Her presence in the studio was enough to change the dynamic in the studio. However, that was not what sowed the seeds of discord in the band. It was her active participation in studio sessions that indeed sowed the seeds of discord in the legendary band. Ringo Starr was one of the most influential persons in the Beatles, but who is he, and where did he hail from? What is his story? Ringo Starr, bundle of energy. From his early days as a promising musician, Sir Richard Starkey, MBE, known professionally to all and sundry all over the world as Ringo Starr, has blossomed into a global icon, captivating millions with his extraordinary talent and infectious personality. Even at 84, his energy is nothing short of miraculous, but he's had to heal from numerous personal struggles, and he has gone on to inspire a whole generation with his resilience and passion for music. Ringo Starr remains a symbol of resilience and passion because, from the tender age of 6, he began experiencing health problems that would see him spend a chunk of his childhood in and out of the hospital. He suffered from appendicitis, which led to a torn appendix and subsequent peritonitis, a life-threatening condition. The recovery process was a task, as he had to stay in the hospital for nearly a year. His subsequent hospitalizations meant that he missed a large portion of his education, putting him behind his peers. Yet there is a silver lining to every cloud. And for Ringo Starr, this silver lining turned out to be his. It was during this period of isolation that his affinity for music began to take root. The radio became his constant companion. The melodies and rhythms that flowed from it captured his young mind. His fascination with the drum began when he was a teenager, and it all started when he joined the hospital band during one of his extended visits to the hospital. His time at the hospital sparked an interest in music for a young Ringo Starr, and he then went on to join the hospital band. How did this set him up for his career? A band experience. The experience of playing in a band, even a makeshift one within the hospital walls, ignited a passion within him. The drums, with their primal beats and ability to drive the rhythm of a song, fascinated him deeply. In drumming, he found an outlet. He found that he could express himself with the drums more than he could ever do so with words. Once he was well enough to leave the hospital, he continued to nurture his love for drumming, and he determined within himself that he would pursue his dreams, despite the odds being stacked against him. His stepfather, Harry Graves, recognized his passion and bought him his first drum kit. This act of kindness was pivotal, as it provided Ringo with the equipment with which to hone his skills and set him on a path that would eventually lead to stardom. By the late 1950s, Ringo Starr was already playing with local bands, honing his craft and gaining much-needed experience. He joined Rory Storm in the Hurricanes, one of the biggest bands in Liverpool then, and this period served as a crucial period for his development as a musician. The Hurricanes were a popular band in Liverpool and also in Hamburg, Germany, where they played extended residencies. These gigs were rigorous, demanding long hours of performance, but they were instrumental in sharpening Ringo's drumming skills and stage presence. His unique drumming style began to take shape during these formative years. He developed a steady, unflashy, and reliable beat that perfectly complemented the band's sound. His approach to drumming was not one of showing off technical prowess, but also about serving the music and maintaining a steady rhythm, a quality that would become his trademark. His journey so far had taken him to the Hurricanes, and he had already established himself in Liverpool and Hamburg as an exceptional drummer made for the big stage. How did he make a name for himself in the Beatles? Joining the Beatles. In 1962, Ringo Starr's journey took a significant turn when he was invited to join the Beatles to replace their previous drummer, Pete Best. Starr quit Rory Storm and the Hurricanes in January 1962 and briefly joined Sheridan in Hamburg before returning to the Hurricanes for a third season at Butlins. On August 14th, Starr accepted Lennon's invitation to join the Beatles. On August 16th, Beatles manager Brian Epstein fired their drummer, Pete Best, who recalled, he said, "I've got some bad news for you. The boys want you out and Ringo in. He said George Martin wasn't too pleased with my playing, and the boys thought I didn't fit in." Starr first performed as a member of the Beatles on August 18, 1962, at a Horticultural Society dance at Port Sunlight. After his appearance at the Cavern Club the following day, Best fans, upset by his firing, held vigils outside his house and at the club shouting, "Pete forever, Ringo never!" Harrison received a black eye from one upset fan, and Epstein, whose car tires they had flattened in anger, temporarily hired a bodyguard. The boy who spent most of his childhood in hospital beds dreaming of rhythms and melodies was now well on his way to becoming a global icon. Now he was an integral part of the Beatles. His drumming became the heartbeat of the band. His innovative style of drumming, characterized by its steady beats and creative fills, was integral to the band's success. Global success of the Beatles. During 1963, the Beatles enjoyed increasing popularity in Britain. In January, their second single, Please Me, followed Love Me Do into the UK charts, and a successful television appearance on Thank Your Lucky Stars earned favorable reviews, leading to a boost in sales and radio play. By the end of the year, the phenomenon known as Beatlemania had spread throughout the country, and by February 1964, the Beatles had become an international success when they performed in New York City on The Ed Sullivan Show to a record 73 million viewers. Ringo Starr commented, "In the States I know I went over well. It knocked me out to see and hear the kids waving for me. I'd made it as a personality. Our appeal is that we're ordinary lads." He was a source of inspiration for several songs written at the time, including Penny Valentine's I Want to Kiss Ringo Goodbye and Rolf Harris's Ringo for President. Cher released her first single, Ringo I Love You, on 1964 under the pseudonym Bonnie Jo Mason. Stepping into the spotlight. In 1964, I Love Ringo lapel pins were the best-selling Beatles merchandise. The prominent placing of the Ludwig logo on the bass drum of his American import drum kit gave the company such a burst of publicity that it became the dominant drum manufacturer in North America for the next 20 years. During live performances, the Beatles continued the Star Time routine that had been popular among his fans. Lennon would place a microphone in front of Starr's kit in preparation for his spotlight moment, and audiences would erupt in screams. When the Beatles made their film debut in A Hard Day's Night, Ringo Starr garnered praise from critics, who considered his delivery of deadpan one-liners and his non-speaking scenes highlights. The extended non-speaking sequences had to be arranged by director Richard Lester because of Starr's lack of sleep the previous night. He commented, "Because I'd been drinking all night, I was incapable of saying a line." Epstein attributed Starr's acclaim to the little man's quaintness. After the release of the Beatles' second feature film, Help, Ringo Starr won a Melody Maker poll against his fellow Beatles for his performance as the central character in the film. Cracks in the Beatles. The narrative of the Beatles took a dramatic turn when Yoko Ono, a Japanese multimedia artist, singer-songwriter, and peace activist, entered the picture. John Lennon's relationship with her was intense and all-consuming, reshaping the dynamics within the band. Born in 1933, Ono had a privileged upbringing. Both her parents' families had made their fortunes in banking, and her father's high-flying job meant that Yoko spent her childhood between Japan and America. observing both cultures as if from a distance. In the aftermath of the devastating air raid on Tokyo in 1945, food was scarce for everyone, and the Onos found themselves trading heirlooms for something to eat. Yoko would later pinpoint this as the awakening of her artistic imagination. Aged 12, she would try to distract her younger brother Kisuke from his hunger by helping him dream up a fantasy menu. "So we had our conceptual dinner, and this may be my first piece of art," she told The Guardian. She channeled that early creativity while studying at Sarah Lawrence, the progressive liberal arts college in New York, laying the foundations of her unique brand of multidisciplinary art. Often spotted scribbling in an apple tree, Ono started to write her first instruction pieces, brief poetic directions telling the reader to create their own art, either literally or using their imagination. She'd eventually compile over 150 of these pieces in Grapefruit, her 1964 book. Music was another source of solace. Ono had been classically trained in piano and opera, but found herself developing more avant-garde tastes. A teacher pointed her in the direction of John Cage, the radical composer at the forefront of New York's experimental music scene. He'd soon become a frequent collaborator and part of Ono's social circle. In 1956, Ono married the pianist Toshi Ichiyanagi, one of Cage's protégés. A college dropout. It wasn't long before Ono dropped out of college and immersed herself in New York's art milieu, hanging out with the artist collective known as Fluxus. The group unraveled the boundaries between art and real life. They were more concerned with staging events that mixed poetry, music, and performance than creating traditional art objects. Fluxus wanted to put the audience at the heart of their work. Ono's 1964 performance, Cut Piece, did exactly that, and won her recognition as a name to watch too. Dressed in her best outfit, the then 31-year-old stood on stage at the Yamaichi Concert Hall in Kyoto, Japan. Audience members were invited to step up and cut away her clothes with scissors. They started off with small, almost polite snips before becoming emboldened, chopping at the artist's bra straps. By 1966, Ono was a significant player in the contemporary art world, well known enough to launch a solo show at London's Indica Gallery, a space at the heart of the capital's countercultural scene. These days, its site is occupied by a branch of White Cube, another Sinestri gallery. This would set the stage for her meeting with John Lennon. Invited along to Ono's exhibition preview, he was immediately struck by one particular piece. After climbing up a ladder, Lennon found a magnifying glass attached to a canvas, then used it to read the tiny word Ono had written onto it, "Yes." Its positivity won him over, he later explained during an appearance on The Mike Douglas Show. In those days, most art put everybody down, got people upset. Lennon and Ono, the beginning. Lennon didn't initially endear himself to Ono, taking a bite out of an apple she had placed on a pedestal and planned to sell for £200. But he otherwise seemed to quickly grasp her conceptual work. Observing one of her instruction paintings, which invited viewers to hammer a nail into a blank canvas, he asked if he could give it a go. Ono demurred, noting that the exhibition hadn't opened to the public yet, before asking him to pay 5 shillings for the privilege. So a smartass here says, "Well, I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in," Lennon later told Playboy. "And that's when we really met. That's when we locked eyes, and she got it and I got it, and that was it." Like an avant-garde Richard Curtis film, except both protagonists were married, Lennon to Cynthia and Ono to her second husband, musician Anthony Cox. Shortly after that first encounter, Ono apparently turned up at the Beatles' Savile Row office unannounced. Lennon wasn't there, Craig Brown writes in his book 1, 2, 3, 4, The Beatles in Time. Ringo Starr was, though, so she directed herself at him instead and began to recount her philosophy of art and life, Brown claims. Unfortunately, Ringo couldn't decipher a word she was saying and exited as fast as his legs could carry. Brown paints a wonderful scene. You can just picture Ringo's hangdog expression as he politely nods his way through an impenetrable monologue, planning how to do a runner. But it's not particularly charitable to either Starr, always the band's resident punchline, or to Ono, dialing up her self-seriousness and her apparent desperation to join the Beatles' inner circle. Brown goes on to imagine how Ringo might have influenced Ono's poetry. Carry a heavy object up a hill, but not for too long, or it'll take you back in. Ono's art is almost too easy to mock. Carry a bag of peas, one of her instruction poems implores. Leave a pea wherever you go. Another invites us to imagine 1,000 suns in the sky shining at the same time. Let them shine for 1 hour, then let them gradually melt into the sky. How poetic. And wait, it's not finished yet. Make one tuna fish sandwich and eat. Detractors could, and let's face it, do claim that this is just, well, gibberish. The sort of sentiment better suited to a particularly spaced-out line of fridge magnets. There are still plenty of Beatles fans who would rather that Ono ha-nod shut up and left their idol well alone. Lennon's breakup from his wife Cynthia was certainly messy and even cruel. It didn't exactly cover him and Ono in glory. Through Ringo's lens, Ringo recalls a particularly tense moment during the recording of the White Album. Ono's constant presence and input made the atmosphere in the studio toxic. Her attempts to influence Lennon's artistic decisions were seen as intrusive by other members of the band already dealing with the fame and burden of living up to their enormous success. They found themselves further divided. Ringo speaks of the growing frustration and the feeling of being undermined, which was palpable during those sessions. The situation reached a boiling point during the recording of the White Album. Ringo Starr reveals how Ono's constant presence and attempts to influence the artistic decisions of Lennon created an atmosphere of distrust and hostility. Band members, once very good friends, were now at odds with each other. Ringo's emotional recounting of these events highlights the deep scars left by this tumultuous period. The recording of the White Album came with a series of disagreements that showed the rifts that had been growing in the band. Ringo's departure from the band during these brief sessions was a testament to the tension he felt. The Beatles split. Lennon's and McCartney's artistic avenues became more disparate, with McCartney disapproving of Lennon and Ono's experimental sound collage Revolution 9, and Lennon contemptuous of light-hearted McCartney songs such as Martha My Dear and Honey Pie. Harrison continued to develop as a songwriter, yet he received little support from within the band during the sessions. Feeling resentment from Lennon and McCartney for his role in leading the Beatles to the Maharishi, Harrison's composition Not Guilty reflected his state of mind after their return from India. Ringo Starr became increasingly dissatisfied with the standard of his drumming. According to author Mark Hertsgaard, this was a feeling that McCartney in particular had done much to encourage. Distressed also by the sour and tense atmosphere that was characteristic of the recording sessions, Ringo Starr felt so isolated that he left the band for several weeks and holidayed with his family in Sardinia. He returned in early September to find his drum kit decorated with flowers, which were a gift from Harrison. With the release of the Beatles in November, the band no longer gave collective interviews or recorded appearances, and public relations were carried out individually. Other evidence of the group's collective alienation came with the release of their 1968 Christmas Fan Club recording. The contributions were entirely individual, and Lennon made disparaging remarks about his bandmates' apparent disdain for Ono. By the end of 1968, the Beatles' status as a group entity was in limbo. McCartney suggested a group project involving rehearsing, recording, and then performing a set of songs for a live concert. The project soon adopted the working title of Get Back. Although the sessions for their double album had involved a degree of ensemble playing, the band were ill-prepared to settle comfortably back into this mode. In particular, Lennon had descended into substance addiction, leaving him variously uncommunicative or highly critical of the venture. Difficult doing business together. In early 1969, the Apple Corps was plagued by mismanagement and was losing money. On January 26th, Lennon and Ono met with Alan Klein, the founder of ABKCO Records, regarding managerial advice. Lennon requested that Klein represent his business interests in the band. McCartney chose to be represented by American entertainment lawyers Lee and John Eastman, the father and brother of his girlfriend, Linda Eastman. whom he married on March 12th. In April, after a series of rancorous meetings between Klein, the Eastmans, and the Beatles, Klein was appointed as the band's business manager on an interim basis, with the Eastmans as the Beatles' lawyers. The band members' quarrels and disharmony over musical matters soon permeated their business discussions. Dick James, the managing director of Northern Songs, publisher of the Lennon and McCartney song catalog, became increasingly concerned over the band's dissension and resentment towards him due to his refusal to renegotiate their royalty rate. Without informing Lennon or McCartney, James and Northern Songs chair Emmanuel Silver accepted a bid from the British entertainment conglomerate Associated Television to sell their 32% stake in the company and recommended other shareholders do the same, which would give ATV a controlling interest. Lennon and McCartney, who together owned 26% of the stock, made a bid to gain a controlling interest in Northern Songs but were unsuccessful. The Eastmans and Klein soon developed an adversarial relationship given their disparate advice and counsel. Conflicting advice regarding an offer to purchase Epstein's NEMS Enterprises, which still collected 25% of the Beatles' income, resulted in a missed opportunity, and the Epstein family sold their 90% stake to Triumph Investment Trust instead. Given a choice between Klein and the Eastmans, Harrison and Ringo Starr opted for Klein. The Eastmans were dismissed as the Beatles' legal representation, and on May 8th, Lennon, Harrison, and Starr signed a contract with Klein to be the band's business manager. This further aggravated the underlying mistrust and antipathy experienced within the band. Rolling Stone states that Klein is easily the least famous of the four new people in the Beatles' lives, but arguably the one who played the biggest role in their demise. John Lennon departs. With the troubled Get Back project put on hold, the group continued to record together sporadically during the spring and early summer of 1969. Otherwise, the band members became increasingly involved in activities outside the band. Among these, Lennon launched an international peace campaign with Ono, spearheaded by their single Give Peace a Chance. Harrison continued to focus on producing Apple Records signings, including Jackie Lomax, Billy Preston, and devotees from the London Radha Krishna Temple, and Ringo Starr began to establish himself as a film actor. Their occasional sessions together over the first half of the year ultimately paved the way for the Beatles' last studio recording project, Abbey Road. The August 18th session for The End marked the final occasion that all four members recorded collectively. The last time the foursome were together in the same studio was for the completion and mixing of I Want You, She's So Heavy 2 days later. On September 8th, while Ringo Starr was hospitalized, Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison met to discuss recording a follow-up to Abbey Road. At the meeting, Lennon and Harrison expressed frustration with having to compete with McCartney to get their songs recorded. Lennon proposed a different approach to songwriting by ending the Lennon and McCartney pretense and having 4 compositions apiece from Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison, with 2 from Ringo and a lead single around Christmas. Harrison referred to the possibility of a new Beatles album in an interview he gave in November, and he called this songwriting arrangement an equal rights thing. McCartney later dismissed the new division of songwriting, saying it wasn't the right balance and was too democratic for its own good. Speaking to Melody Maker in September, Lennon said, "The trouble is we've got too much material. Now that George is writing a lot, we could put out a double album every month." During the September 8th meeting, McCartney expressed that before Abbey Road he thought that George's songs weren't that good, to which Lennon reacted by saying none of the other Beatles liked McCartney's Obladi Oblada and Maxwell's Silver Hammer, and that those types of songs should be given to other artists to record. Soon after the sessions for Abbey Road, Lennon's substance use inspired him to record Cold Turkey with his and Ono's conceptual group, the Plastic Ono Band, after the Beatles had rejected the song for release as a single. The formation of the Plastic Ono Band was conceived as an artistic outlet for Lennon and Ono, but the enthusiastic reception afforded their performance at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival on September 13, 1969, ostensibly crystallized Lennon's decision to leave the Beatles, which he made on the flight back to London. During a band meeting at Apple on September 20th, he informed McCartney, Starr, and Klein of his decision. Harrison was not present at the meeting, telling them he wanted a divorce. That same day, the band signed a renegotiated recording contract with Capitol Records, guaranteeing them a higher royalty rate. The sensitivity of the negotiations with Capitol led to Klein and McCartney urging Lennon to keep his announcement private, which Lennon agreed to do. On November 25th, Lennon's comments from a recent radio interview were reported in an NME article titled "The Beatles on the Brink of Splitting." Among his remarks, Lennon said that the running of Apple had superseded the band's music making, and he went off and on with the idea of the group recording together again. McCartney later recalled that in the 3 or 4 months after Lennon's announcement, he, Harrison, and Starr would phone each other asking, "Well, is this it then?" McCartney said that they suspected that it might be one of John's little flings, and that Lennon might change his mind, since he did kind of leave the door open. In early January 1970, while visiting Denmark with Ono, Lennon told a journalist that, "We're not breaking up the band, but we're breaking its image," and added that none of the Beatles were millionaires, which is why before long, they would record a new album. Life after a band as iconic and as great as the Beatles must have been very difficult for anyone. Was it difficult for Ringo? Did he soar? Did he drop? Life after the Beatles. Shortly before McCartney announced his exit from the Beatles in April 1970, he and McCartney had a falling out due to McCartney's refusal to cede the release date of his eponymous solo album to allow for Starr's debut, Sentimental Journey, and the Beatles' Let It Be. His album, composed of renditions of pre-rock standards that included musical arrangements by Quincy Jones, Maurice Gibb, George Martin, and McCartney, peaked at number 7 in the UK and number 22 in the US. Ringo Starr followed Sentimental Journey with the country-inspired Beaucoup of Blues, engineered by Scotty Moore and featuring renowned Nashville session musician Pete Drake. Despite favorable reviews, the album was a commercial failure. He subsequently combined his musical activities with developing a career as a film actor. He played drums on Lennon's John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, Ono's Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band, and on Harrison's albums All Things Must Pass, Living in the Material World, and Dark Horse. In 1971, Starr participated in the Concert for Bangladesh, organized by Harrison, and with him co-wrote the hit single It Don't Come Easy, which reached number 4 in both the US and the UK. The following year, he released his most successful UK hit, Back Off Boogaloo, again produced and co-written by Harrison, which peaked at number 2 in the UK and number 9 in the US. Having become friends with the English singer Mark Bolan, Starr made his directorial debut with the 1972 T-Rex documentary Born to Boogie. Ringo Starr founded the record label Ringo Records in 1975. The company signed 11 artists and released 15 singles and 5 albums between 1975 and 1978, including works by David Henschel, Graham Bonnet, and Rab Noakes. The commercial impact of Starr's own career diminished over the same period, however, although he continued to record and remained a familiar celebrity presence. Speaking in 2001, he attributed this downward turn to his taking enough interest in music, saying of himself and friends such as Nielsen and Keith Moon, "We weren't musicians dabbling in substance and alcohol. Now we were people in active use dabbling in music." Starr, Nielsen, and Moon were members of a drinking club, the Hollywood Vampires. From the late 1960s until the mid-1980s, Starr and the designer Robin Cruikshank ran a furniture and interior design company, RROR. RROR's designs were placed on sale in the department stores of Harvey Nichols and Liberty of London. The company designed the interiors of palaces in Abu Dhabi and Oman, and the apartments of Paul Raymond and Starr's friend Nielsen. One thing is clear even today. The child that spent much of his early childhood days in the hospital touched millions of lives with his drumming, and shares only fond memories of his time with the greatest band ever, the Beatles. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Also, watch another of our interesting videos by clicking on the video shown on your screen.